Hi everyone, Tony Tonkin here from the Child Protection Party. Glad you could be with us here on this particular live feed on a Sunday night. We are organising live feeds every Sunday night at 7 o'clock. Not every time we will have an interview as we did last week, but we're hoping from time to time that we have more interviews. So if you wish to become a part of one of our live feeds, please let myself or Avery know, and we can incorporate you in a discussion around a topic that interests you in relation to children. So join us, become a part of the process. We believe the Child Protection Party is an opportunity for people in the community to have a voice for the issues that matter to you. So let us know what those issues are and have a conversation with us. Now, those issues can be around anything. In fact, hopefully they're around kids, but issues pertaining to disabilities for kids, for family court issues in relation to children, social justice issues that you think are important to you because your needs are not being met, are certainly things that we could talk about. Learning disabilities, education, the number of issues that there are that we could talk about in relation to kids is just astronomical, and I'm sure we at the party haven't met a third of those. So join us, have a conversation with us about the issues that concern you. Today, though, I had two subjects. I'm not too sure if I'm going to get to the second one, but the first one is about victim blaming. So that came about because there was an article from the Sydney University, I think it is, that talked about documentation written by professionals and how the language that professionals use is often blaming victims, and in most cases women, however not always women, but most cases blaming the victim. I actually don't want to genderfy it, so I don't want it to be about men versus women. I hate that stuff because I'm working on a case at the moment where it is clear that the male who is the victim of domestic violence and abuse is becoming the victim. And the language and so forth used in relation to him is the same as the sort of language that's used in relation to women who are also victims. So I just don't want it to be a gender issue. I do understand, as I'll talk about later, that a lot of family violence is perpetrated by men. It's just a simple fact, I guess, and we can't escape any of that, but that's just the reality. But what I'm interested in tonight is for you to have a conversation with me about issues in relation to your experiences around documentation that has been written discussing your situation. And if you're being blamed, if you're the victim of domestic violence, you're a victim of mental well-being issues or drug use or whatever it is, that the people writing the reports on you are making statements about you which is telling you that as the victim, it is wrong for you to be the victim, that somehow amongst the sort of mess that has been created, that you are, because you're the victim, then you are the problem. And this is the problem. The problem is that so many professional people refuse to be able to look at the totality of a situation, and they refuse often to analyse or to look at what's happening on the other side, that they hear this one story, and that one story becomes the way that they have determined who you are and how you're interacting with your world. And that is really, really unhelpful. A number of cases I've worked on, I know that there have been, that particularly the women that I've worked with have been in violent and abusive situations. And for some reason, and this is a case also with this male that I'm working with who's a victim of domestic violence, is that for some reason, which I yet haven't quite worked out, and I don't understand this in any of these circumstances that I've worked with, I don't understand why it is that they cannot see that the perpetrator of the violence or abuse is being able to spin a story in such a way that that it makes it appear that they somehow are the victim. And often in order to do that, they have to exaggerate and they have to lie about certain circumstances. So they'll say that they're the ones that are being violated. And for some reason, the fact that they have said that and the way that they've said that becomes fact. And the other person, whatever facts they tend to put forward, are just dismissed or ignored. It's a bit like, I was reflecting on this because I actually wrote a report today to the Minister in relation to a particular client, and I was concerned that the Chloe Valentine situation is likely to reoccur, that this particular client has a child and the child's with the mother, and that the department don't seem to understand the gravity of the situation given that this child has been placed with the mother, and that they have written a report which supports the mother, who clearly has mental well-being issues, as is she was incarcerated for a few days because police had picked her up. She'd lost the lot and she was hospitalised. And that because even if with that amount of information and with information that I have provided, and that's not just this one case, there are many cases where I've provided a stack of information in relation to my assessment of a client or someone else, someone that perhaps had a relationship with or whatever. But my version of that, regardless of my experience, is ignored and somehow dismissed, because some 25 or 30-year-old person with very little experience, because they work for the department, have been able to determine the correct view of who this person is. And I think that that's fraught with danger, because I'm concerned in this particular case that the parent who has the child is so psychotic at times that she may in fact harm and even kill the child. And I've raised that issue with them, but they've still dismissed it. I don't understand any of that. But the best we can do, I believe, is to at least raise the issue and start to talk about it. And hopefully, if something ever, heaven forbid, but ever happens that damages this child, then we've got a pretty strong case to take to the coroner and then perhaps to a higher court. Who knows? But, and look, just recently I had someone call me, I haven't got the full details at the moment, but they called me the other day in relation to a child being removed simply because they've chosen to offer this child some sort of alternate medicine for asthma, I think it was, and how the department just dived in and removed the child. And some of that reason may be because these people were not white, Caucasian, whatever, Anglo-Saxon, and judged them. And I think that's fraught with danger as well, where people, particularly social workers and psychologists, are so ill-informed about their own biases that they go off and they make decisions based on those biases without understanding what they are. We see this in the Aboriginal community in particular, where so many workers have already preconceived ideas as to who Indigenous people are, and then remove their children based on those preconceived ideas, which may or may not fit with the reasons why a child should or should not be removed. However, they make their decisions on that, and their writings and everything they say is determined by those biases. Now, I just want to take us to this particular... so I just want to thank those people that have come online. And, thanks, Deb. Can I just remind everybody just to share this video, if you wouldn't mind. We'd like as many people as we can to view it and to contact the Child Protection Party if there are any issues that you think we should address. So this is victim blaming. So I've got the article here. So the interesting thing is that it comes from the University of Sydney. I was right. Victim blaming can affect trial outcomes is its title. And I think that's so true. It's like I've been waiting for years for some academic to come forward and at least identify that the information often provided for trials Now, I just need to put that in context. That includes the family court, youth court, children's court, Supreme Court, any court where a victim has been identified, and particularly where children are involved, because the stuff around children is a very emotive issue. And I guess, to be fair, we see this around trials, rape trials and stuff like that, because the victim, often being the person who has been raped, is often victimised in the same way. And we need to really start to think about, why does this happen in the first place, and what is there that we can do in order to rectify that? And I think there's some helpful stuff that's come out of this particular document. So she says, Martha often framed as mad, bad or sad. I have seen that so many times in court documents in relation to child protection cases. And they may not use the word mad, but they will highlight the mental well-being of the mother in most cases. And it is sad because they don't... You very rarely... I've met many cases where the man, in a lot of cases, of course, is the perpetrator, and I've come across many instances where no one's ever thought that the man's behaviour, like holding a knife up, threatening to strangle a person, gaslighting that person for years and years on end, that they have created that sense of madness in their victim. No one's ever thought to analyse or think about their mental well-being and how they are interpreting their world that has created these sorts of behaviours. So, and I find that fascinating. In fact, it'd be interesting to have a look at the number of cases that actually come forth where the victim is simply identified as being mentally unwell, but the perpetrator of any crime or incident against this person is not evaluated at all as having any mental well-being problem, because, like violence and abuse and controlling and coercive control is not a mental well-being problem. Well, of course it is, but somehow this doesn't become an issue often within these courts, because there's a blindness that professionals have to some of these issues. And often that is because the people that commit these terrible acts are often sociopaths or psychopaths, I think, or have extreme narcissistic personalities often. And those people are very clever at manipulating others. You think about it. They've been able to manipulate this other person forever, and they manipulate a whole lot of other people around them to see them as the victim. And therefore, why is it that, why would this person who's just so clever and so smart and so articulate, why would they have any problems or issues at all? So it must be with this other person who are creating the problems for them. So it must be the other person's behaviour that creates the problem. It's a bit like when you hear dads, parents, particularly men, say, she made me do it. So, and that's the underlying theme. Someone else makes someone else do it, as if you're not responsible for your own bloody behaviour. Crazy stuff. But in this particular article, they go on to say, mothers are framed as child protection documents are often proffered as evidence to the court cases, and that's in all these other courts as well that I highlighted. A new analysis finds the language used in these documents can adversely affect mothers and children who are subject to domestic and family violence. So they adversely affect them, and we know that because of the types of language that they use. And they go on to say, due to the language used in these documents, judgments can place more weight on the response of victims, survivors, than on the action of men who perpetrate domestic violence. For example, documents used in court proceedings throughout Australia often frame domestic violence as fights between parents. It's really interesting the way they've identified some of this language that's used. So I guess when we're looking at court documents, it might be really helpful from now on just to have a look at some of this language that's used and see how it may manipulate the decisions that are made within courts. And we'll talk about this one in a moment. Parental conflict or mutual combat or domestic violence was framed as the outcome of dysfunctional relationship. This can result in women being blamed for their own victimisation, which is what I've been talking about, or even being accused of complicity in the abuse of their children who are exposed to domestic violence. And I think that paragraph sums it up pretty well, because if we're identifying it as a fight between parents, that makes it a mutual fight. Now, someone many years ago, over 30 years ago, who was an expert in domestic violence, once told me that if you have two people fighting and they're not afraid of each other and they're simply bashing each other up, male and female, then that isn't necessarily domestic violence. It's when this fear is created in that relationship, which doesn't have to be about physical assault, then that is domestic violence. And so when we're talking about, we're minimising what domestic violence is when we're talking about it as being fights between parents. It is not a fight between parents. Sometimes it is an assault of one person against another. And why isn't it that you wouldn't talk about that assault when you're talking about domestic violence? So you could say a person has stated that this is what the other person did to them. That isn't making a judgment, that's simply stating what one person has said about another. That is mutual combat. What a crazy word to use, combat. So it's something that two people have an understanding about and they can go and beat the shit out of each other, and that seems to be okay because it's mutual. The point is that it won't be mutual. That one of those parties would have preferred not to have been beaten up by the other one. All right? Or if it's a verbal assault, one of those parties would have preferred not to be assaulted verbally by the other person. It is not mutual at all. So let's agree that we've got to have a fight. And okay, you take position A, I'll take position B, and then we'll go for it. You know, like it's a combat situation, like it's a game. You know, none of it's a game. But this is the way that the documentation refers to it as. That it's... It could be a dysfunctional relationship. There's no disputing that the relationship's dysfunctional where one person has more power and control and is endeavouring to control another. Everybody knows that is that's an uneven, unhelpful, dysfunctional relationship. But it doesn't identify how those dysfunctions impact one person compared to the other. So they go on to say, 3 particular representatives we found in case notes were of mothers who failed to protect their children in a DFV context. Domestically violent men being rendered invisible, and that's the problem. That's what I was saying before, that often the analysis of the perpetrator, I won't call it all men, but the perpetrator of the violence is not identified and is not seen in the same context as that of the victim. So the victim becomes that person who has mental well-being issues, who has money issues, who's gambling, who's doing whatever. This is that context in which we see that person, but there is nothing about the other person and how they're interacting in this relationship. And that's where this invisibility that they're talking about comes. And survivors of mental distress and or problematic substance misuse being decontextualized. So mental well-being is the example for me, where we have issues around a person's mental well-being, which can be present primarily because their whole life has been distorted by gaslighting, by abuse, by a whole lot of behaviours that have been diminishing and putting down and really raping this person of their sense of self. So that stuff is not contextualized in terms of how this person is now experiencing their worldview, because they've been diminished by the stuff that's happened by the perpetrator. And they've got an example here, and this is what Jackson, a newborn baby Jackson, as a newborn baby, is at significant risk of harm due to his mother's mental ill health, significant history of drug misuse and her involvement in domestically violent relationships. It is recommended that Jackson be placed in alternative care as he is considered to be an unacceptable risk of harm in her care due to the aforementioned issue associated with her lifestyle choices. Despite being a victim of repeated assaults, the mother appears reluctant to leave the relationship. That statement is something that we all, those of us that have experienced the child protection system, see over and over again. In this case, they're talking about Jackson. It could be anybody, right? Where the context of this discussion is about, so they mentioned here, mother's mental health, significant history of drug misuse, and her involvement in domestic violent relationships. This becomes the context around who this woman is. Right? There's no mention of the perpetrator's issues, like perpetrating violence, coercive control, the fact that they may have a gun, the fact that they threaten to kill somebody, no matter. I mean, there's no mention of that here. And I think part of that reason is that everybody expects the mother to be the primary parent of a child. And that is wrong too, just in itself, because men are just as capable of parenting children as are women. So why do we do that? Because socially we've constructed this notion that women are the ones that... So if a woman isn't able to care for this child, then lo and behold, no one is, it appears. And particularly the person who's committing the... So it's almost like... How can I describe it? You need to focus on the person with whom there are more faults. So the more faults that you find in the mother, because this is the circumstances around which notifications and everything else are made, the mother is the one that's attacked, so the way that develops is that then she becomes the focus, not the other person in her life, not the context around the situations that have brought her to this particular point. And they go on further to say, and I'll just talk about this. So what is domestic family violence in Australia? According to the Australian Human Rights Commission, violence against women is one of the most common manifestations of human rights abuse in Australia, with 1 in 4 Australian women experiencing at least one incident of violence by an intimate partner since the age of 15 years. Exposure to DFV is also a common experience for many Australian children, with 1 in 10 men and 1 in 8 women witnessing violence towards their mother by a partner before the age of 15 years. So there we have it. We have... I hope some of that to some degree makes some sense to all of you. I'll probably, that's all we need to talk about tonight. I'll leave the other subject, which was parents with learning disabilities. So I'll leave that till next week, perhaps. But so I'll just have a look at. So Deb says she's seen it personally. I was spayed. Narcissists and sociopaths can be very deceptive. I said that. Thanks, Leslie. There is a fear between parents and child safety workers. Some would say they feel they are in DV relationships. Yeah. Now, wherever... Thanks. Who said that? Kristen. Yeah. That's so true, because where there is a power imbalance of any description, there is going to be some level of abuse, particularly where someone uses that power to control or influence another person. And we see that in the family court all the time. We see that in the child protection system every time, because a lot of the workers don't understand the power and influence that they do have, and that if that power and influence through the decisions that they make is used ineffectively, then they are responsible for the damage that they do to hundreds of thousands of kids every year. And it's sad to watch that happen, because if they had a better sense of how to wield that power, they could probably wield it for good rather than not. No wonder the mums are traumatised. They've been victims to physical, emotional and financial abuse. My daughter's ex used to take her phone from her and hide it in the car keys, followed her through the house. Yep, heard all that before, Deb. Police knew this bloke and 10 officers turned up, yet he has never been assessed. Yeah, so, and sometimes that's the case. There are often court reports. There is other information, I guess, around some of these perpetrators, but for whatever reason, it either never gets presented, and if it gets presented, it's nowhere near as significant as the abuse perpetrated against the other person, supposedly. So, their mental health and their being in bad relationships and potential drug use and all that other stuff seems to outweigh any behaviours that the other person may have perpetrated. And just having a look further down, have my kids. So Jai says, have my kids, and she plays victim all the time. Will I just be the best dad I can be? Jai, I don't know what being the best dad you can be means, quite frankly. But if you are treating the children respectfully, and if you're treating their mother respectfully, and not putting her down, or if you're a woman with the kids and you're not putting him down, then that's treating the kids respectfully, and will have a better outcome than abusing the daylights out of the person with whom you're in conflict. Is this paper report available online? Yes, it is. Yvonne, I'll just put it on, I'll just share it, which I'm doing right now. And anybody can access it if you so desire. How do you... Kristen, you've asked the $30,000 question. How do you prove it? One of the ways to, they say that the children's court, the family court, and youth court is about about a balance of probabilities, and producing evidence in those situations is often really difficult, because the department, or whoever you're fighting against, whoever has the most money and influence, they are the ones that have the power to be able to produce what they need to. But certainly, I would like to think that some of this information that we're now talking about that's being produced by academics is something that also could be produced in court. So the ideas that I talked about initially, which was about how people interpret, or the language that they use to describe domestic violence, for example, and that all that language is directed towards the mother. If those issues could be challenged in court, I am convinced that judges and magistrates would take notice. The problem that we have is that the legal profession is so inept at being able to identify and to present arguments that are different, that the same old crap gets presented over and over again to the courts. And the best example of that, I think, is attachment theory, where the ideas around attachment theory, as wrong as they are, as long as they're being produced in the way that they are, the magistrate and others will believe them, because there's no alternative being offered. But when we can start getting lawyers, in particular, to present alternate facts, we will find that eventually over time it will change. So I would suggest if any of you are facing court proceedings of any description, that you might find a way to start to talk about, present these articles, such as this one I've just put up, and start talking about that to your magistrate, and going through the documents and highlighting the language that these people are using, and then refer that back to this academic article. And then you should find some professional people who support these ideas and get them to come in and argue for you as well. Until we're able to do all of that, then the same old crap will be rolled out over and over again, and people will believe the same old crap that they've been believing for years. So we need to be able to instigate those particular changes. Yeah, but Angel, you're right. It does appear that sometimes even physical evidence. One of the things I think that I've discovered that probably needs to change within the court system is really around finding professionals who will support your argument, and getting in particular professionals to do the reports for you about you. They should sit and look independent, but they hopefully will look different from those presented by court psychologists and department psychologists and social workers. So, and to find those people, I mean, they are out there. I think I've seen some reports from psychiatrists sometimes that didn't necessarily support the department's view of this particular person, and they can prove to be quite powerful. I know of a psychologist who has a really healthy view around the way parents should be thinking and are thinking about their children and so on, and a healthy attitude or a different attitude to attachment theory. And, you know, I wish I had the funds to be able to put him in court and to work primarily with the people that contact us, because I'm sure that would have a really good outcome on a lot of occasions. The problem is that there are not enough of those people to do that work. So I just want to thank you all. I just want to say, for those people that are watching on YouTube, if you could just remember, if you're ever watching anything on YouTube, if you could just subscribe, like it, and ring the bell, would be really, really good. So next week, we'll be talking about parents with learning disabilities and the impact that will have on them. So thanks, everybody, for being a part of this conversation tonight. Continue the conversation. I'll get back to it. I'll make comments where necessary. And if you could, just remember to join CPP as well. We need as many voices as we can, and we need as many active members as we can. So become active in the Child Protection Party, and it will benefit you and your family. Thanks for being with me. Take care, everybody, and more importantly, be safe.